A single satisfying drop number, one digit reversed on a financial report, nearly destroyed a $1 billion company overnight. And the only person who caught it wasn't a Harvard-trained auditor or a Wall Street analyst. It was a janitor, a single father working the night shift, cleaning offices most executives never even noticed him in. By the time CEO Scarlett Hayes realized what had happened, her empire was already burning to the ground. But what Noah Bennett did next didn't just save the company. It forced her to confront a truth far more devastating than bankruptcy. If this story reaches you, follow my channel to the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with the name of your city so I can see just how far this story travels. Part 1. The fluorescent lights in the lobby of Hayes Global Industries hummed the way they always did at 6:45 in the morning, that low mechanical drone that most people stopped hearing after their first week on the job. But Scarlett Hayes heard it now. She heard it the way you hear a clock ticking in an empty house after everyone has left. Because everyone had left. She stood in the center of the lobby with her arms crossed over her chest, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles in her neck ached. The glass doors at the entrance were still smudged with fingerprints from the last wave of employees who had walked out carrying cardboard boxes and laptop bags and whatever shreds of dignity they could salvage from a Monday morning that had shattered every assumption they'd ever made about job security. Scarlett was 30 years old. She had been CEO of Hayes Global Industries for 4 years, ever since her father, Richard Hayes, suffered a stroke that left him unable to speak, unable to walk, unable to do anything except stare out a window in a long-term care facility in Connecticut, while his daughter tried to hold together the company he'd spent 40 years building. 4 years. That was how long it had taken Scarlett to go from the youngest CEO in the company's history to the woman who would be remembered for destroying it. She pressed her thumbnail into the side of her index finger until the skin turned white, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Her mother used to swat her hand and say, "Stop that, you'll draw blood." But her mother had been dead since Scarlett was 19, and there was nobody left to swat her hand now. The bankruptcy filing had gone public at 6 o'clock that morning. By 6:15, every major financial news outlet in the country had the story. By 6:30, the parking lot was already half empty. People didn't even bother pretending they were coming back. Scarlett's phone had been buzzing nonstop for the last hour. Board members, attorneys, journalists, former partners who suddenly remembered they had her number. She'd silenced it after the 14th call. What was the point? There was nothing left to say. The auditors had confirmed it. The consultants had confirmed it. The lawyers had confirmed it. Hayes Global Industries was insolvent, effective immediately, and the woman standing alone in a lobby that still smelled like floor wax and coffee was the last person alive who hadn't accepted it. Except she hadn't accepted it. Not because she had some heroic refusal to surrender. Not because she was clinging to hope. She hadn't accepted it because something in her gut, some jagged, stubborn animal instinct buried beneath layers of spreadsheets and board meetings and sleepless nights, kept whispering that the numbers were wrong. But the numbers were never wrong. That was the whole point of numbers. They didn't have opinions. They didn't play favorites. They just were. She uncrossed her arms and pressed both palms flat against her thighs, smoothing the fabric of her skirt in a gesture that looked calm, but felt like holding on to the edge of a cliff. "Ms. Hayes?" The voice came from behind her. Male, quiet, slightly out of breath. Scarlett didn't turn around immediately. She was so accustomed to people approaching her with bad news that her body had developed an automatic delay, a half-second pause before facing whatever fresh disaster was walking toward her. She turned. The man standing 6 feet away was not someone she recognized. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with broad shoulders that didn't quite match his otherwise lean build, as if his body had been assembled from 2 different blueprints. He had dark hair that needed a cut, brown eyes that looked tired but alert, and he was wearing a gray uniform shirt with the building's maintenance logo on the chest pocket. A janitor. He was holding a single sheet of paper in his right hand, slightly crumpled, as if he'd been gripping it too hard. "Ms. Hayes, I'm sorry to bother you. I know this is a bad time." Scarlett stared at him. Her expression didn't soften. It didn't harden either. It just held, the way a wall holds when the wind pushes against it. "Who are you?" "Noah Bennett." I work maintenance, night shift mostly. And you're here at 6:45 in the morning because Noah's eyes dropped to the paper in his hand, then back up to her face. He swallowed. The lump in his throat moved visibly. Whatever he was about to say, it was costing him something. I found something. In the numbers. Scarlett's left eyebrow moved about 2 millimeters. On anyone else, it would have been invisible. On Scarlett Hayes, it was the equivalent of slamming a fist on a table. In the numbers, she repeated, flat, colorless. The cash flow report. The one from the quarterly review. Look, I know how this sounds. I know I'm a janitor, I get it. But there's a number in that report that doesn't make sense, and I've been staring at it for 3 weeks, and I can't make it make sense no matter how I look at it. Scarlett took a slow breath through her nose. She could feel the exhaustion pressing against the backs of her eyes like thumbs. She had slept 4 hours in the last 2 days. She had consumed enough coffee to dissolve the lining of a normal stomach. And now a night shift janitor, holding a wrinkled piece of paper, was standing in front of her telling her he'd found something in the numbers that the most expensive financial minds in the country had missed. Mr. Bennett? Noah. Mr. Bennett, I appreciate you coming to me with this. I do. But we've had 3 separate audit firms go through every line of every report this company has produced in the last 18 months. We've had forensic accountants. I know all of that. And I'm telling you, they missed something. The silence that followed was heavy enough to have its own gravity. Scarlett studied his face. She was good at reading people, not in the intuitive, emotional way that some people claim to be, but in the mechanical way. She cataloged micro-expressions like data points, the slight flare of his nostrils, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes didn't wander, didn't blink too fast, didn't do any of the things that liars' eyes did when they were performing confidence they didn't actually feel. This man believed what he was saying. Whether he was right was a different question, but he believed it. Show me, she said. Noah stepped forward and held out the paper. It was a printout of page 14 of the Q3 Consolidated Cash Flow Statement, a document Scarlett had read so many times she could recite sections of it from memory. Noah had circled a number near the bottom of the page in blue pen and drawn an arrow to the margin, where he'd written a series of calculations in handwriting that was surprisingly neat for a man whose hands looked like they'd spent years gripping mop handles and floor buffers. Scarlett looked at the circled number. Then she looked at his margin calculations. Then she looked at the number again. This is the net asset position for the Meridian acquisition, she said. Right. That's the problem. That number is negative. I'm aware that it's negative. The Meridian acquisition was a loss. That's been documented extensively. But it shouldn't be negative. Not like this. Look at the underlying asset valuation on page 8. Noah reached over and pointed to a reference number in the top right corner of the page. That valuation was positive as of Q2. The only way it flips negative by Q3 is if someone reversed the sign on the entry. And if they reverse the sign on this entry, then every report that pulls from this line, every downstream calculation, every summary, every projection, all of it is built on a number that's pointing in the wrong direction. Scarlett's thumb pressed harder into her index finger. She could feel her heartbeat in her temples now, which was something that only happened when her body recognized a threat before her brain did. That's a data entry error, she said. You're describing a data entry error. Yes. A single data entry error that somehow survived 3 independent audits. Yes. And you caught it because I clean the conference room on the 14th floor 3 nights a week, and your finance team leaves their reports on the table like napkins. I'm not a financial analyst, Ms. Hayes. I didn't go to business school, but I can read a spreadsheet, and I know what negative numbers mean, and that number has been bothering me since the first time I saw it. Scarlett looked up from the paper. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something that wasn't exhaustion or anger or the slow grinding pressure of trying to keep a dying company alive. She felt uncertain, and the uncertainty terrified her more than the bankruptcy. Because if this man was right, if a janitor with no financial training had spotted a catastrophic error that 3 audit firms had missed, then the bankruptcy filing was based on false data. And if the bankruptcy filing was based on false data, then everything Scarlett thought she knew about the state of her company was wrong. And if everything she knew was wrong, then she had to ask the question she had spent the last 4 years avoiding. What else had she missed? Scarlett's corner office on the 32nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city's skyline. On clear days, you could see all the way to the river. On days like this, overcast, gray, the sky pressing down like a lid, the windows just reflected the room back at itself, turning everything into a dim, ghostly double. She sat behind her desk with the printout spread flat in front of her. Noah stood on the other side of the desk, his hands in his pockets, looking profoundly uncomfortable in a room that was designed to make everyone except Scarlett Hayes feel profoundly uncomfortable. "Sit down," Scarlett said without looking up. "I'm fine standing. Mr. Bennett, I'm about to call my CFO and tell him that a member of the maintenance staff may have identified a critical error in our financials. This conversation is going to be extremely unpleasant. You might as well be sitting for it." Noah hesitated, then lowered himself into one of the leather chairs across from her desk. The chair was worth more than his monthly rent. He sat on the edge of it like he was afraid of leaving a mark. Scarlett picked up her desk phone and dialed. It rang twice. "Scarlett?" The voice on the other end belonged to Victor Zheng, Chief Financial Officer of Hayes Global Industries, a man who had been with the company since before Scarlett was born, and who had never once, in all the years she'd known him, admitted to being wrong about anything. "Victor, I need you in my office, now." "I'm already on my way to the lawyers. We have the creditor meeting at—" "Cancel it." Silence. Then, "Excuse me?" "I said cancel it, or delay it. I don't care which. I need you in my office in the next 15 minutes. "Scarlett, we are in the middle of the most significant—" "15 minutes, Victor." She hung up before he could respond. Noah watched her from the chair, saying nothing. He had the kind of stillness that came not from confidence, but from practice. The practiced quiet of someone who had learned early in life that the less space you took up, the fewer problems found you. "How long have you worked here?" Scarlett asked, still looking at the printout. "Almost 3 years." "Night shift the whole time?" "Mostly. I switch to days sometimes when my daughter's school schedule changes." "How old is your daughter?" 6. Scarlett glanced up. "Who watches her when you're working nights?" "My neighbor, Mrs. Delgado. She's retired. She stays at my apartment until I get home in the morning." "That's a lot of trust to put in a neighbor." "She's a good woman, and my daughter loves her, so—" Scarlett nodded. She didn't press further. She could tell from the way he talked about his daughter, the way his voice changed, became softer and more careful, like he was handling something fragile, that he was the kind of father who measured every decision against a single question. "Is this good for my kid?" She respected that. She didn't say so, because Scarlett Hayes did not hand out verbal affirmations like party favors, but she respected it. 12 minutes later, Victor Zheng walked through the door. He was 58, immaculately groomed, wearing a suit that probably cost as much as Noah's car. He had the kind of face that looked perpetually disappointed, as if the world had been failing to meet his standards since approximately 1990. He stopped when he saw Noah. "Who is this?" "This is Noah Bennett. He works in building maintenance." Victor looked at Noah. Then he looked at Scarlett. Then he looked at Noah again, the way a restaurant critic might look at a fly in his soup. "And he is in your office because he found something." Scarlett slid the printout across the desk. "Page 14, the net asset position on the Meridian acquisition. Look at the circled number." Victor picked up the paper with the tips of his fingers, as if it might be contagious. He scanned the page. His expression didn't change. "I see it. What about it?" "It's negative, sir," Noah said. Victor's eyes moved to Noah with the speed and warmth of a security camera. "I'm aware that it's negative. The Meridian acquisition resulted in a net loss. This has been thoroughly documented." "But the underlying asset valuation was positive in Q2, Noah said. He leaned forward in his chair, his elbows on his knees. "I checked. The raw valuation report from Q2 shows a positive number. The only way you get a negative number on this line in Q3 is if someone manually reversed the sign. And if that sign is wrong, then every report downstream of this entry is wrong. Every single one." Victor set the paper down on the desk. Slowly, deliberately. The way a man sets down a card he's already decided is worthless. Mr. Bennett, is it? I appreciate your enthusiasm, truly. But this company has retained 3 of the top auditing firms in the country to review these exact figures. Every number on that page has been verified, cross-referenced, and confirmed. I have personally overseen then personally oversee it again, Scarlett said. Victor turned to her. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. It was the first time in Scarlett's memory that she had seen Victor Jung at a loss for words. Scarlett, you cannot be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? You want me to halt the creditor proceedings. Proceedings that are legally mandated, I might add. Because a janitor thinks he found an error that 3 audit firms missed? I want you to pull the raw data on the Meridian acquisition. I want the original asset valuation from Q2 compared line by line against the Q3 consolidation. I want every entry in the cash flow statement traced back to its source. And I want it done in this building, today, before we walk into any courtroom and tell a judge that this company is dead. This is insane. Then it'll be a short review. Victor stared at her. His nostrils flared. A vein in his left temple pulsed once, twice. He was a proud man who had spent 30 years building a reputation as one of the sharpest financial minds in the industry, and he was being asked to re-examine his own work because of a man in a gray uniform who cleaned bathrooms for a living. Fine, Victor said. The word came out like a piece of glass being stepped on. I'll pull the data. But when this turns out to be a waste of time, and it will, I want it on the record that I objected. Noted, Scarlett said. Now get your team in here. But the conference room on the 14th floor, the same room Noah cleaned 3 nights a week, was transformed within the hour into a war room. Scarlett had called in the 5 remaining members of the senior finance team, along with 2 in-house analysts and an IT specialist who could access the company's raw accounting databases. The mood in the room was somewhere between a funeral and a firing squad. Rachel Torres, the company's head of internal audit, sat at the far end of the table with her laptop open and her face locked in an expression of barely controlled fury. She was 42, razor sharp, and she took the implication that her audit team had missed something personally. Because it was personal. If there was an error in the financials, it meant her entire department had failed. David Kim, senior financial analyst, sat next to Rachel with 3 monitors arranged in front of him and a coffee cup that had been refilled so many times the inside was permanently stained brown. He hadn't spoken since arriving. He just typed. Marcus Webb, the IT specialist, hunched over a terminal in the corner, pulling raw database entries and muttering to himself in a way that suggested he had long ago stopped distinguishing between internal monologue and external speech. Victor stood at the head of the table opposite Scarlett, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, a gesture of professional seriousness that he deployed the way a general deploys troops. And Noah sat in a chair against the wall, slightly apart from the group, watching everything with the quiet attention of a man who was used to being invisible and had learned to use that invisibility as a kind of superpower. Okay, Rachel said, her voice tight. I'm pulling the Q2 asset valuation for the Meridian acquisition. Original source data, pre-consolidation. She typed, clicked, waited. The room was so quiet Scarlett could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents. Got it. Q2 Meridian net asset position, positive 87.3 million. Now pull Q3, Scarlett said. More typing, more clicking. Q3 Meridian net asset position as reported in the consolidated cash flow, negative 87.3 million. Nobody moved. Negative, Rachel repeated, her voice dropping half an octave. She looked up from her screen. That's not a valuation change. That's the same number with the sign flipped. Victor's face went white, not metaphorically. His actual skin color changed, as if someone had reached inside him and turned off a light. That can't be right, he said. Pull it again. Rachel pulled it again. The numbers didn't change. Numbers never did. David, Scarlett said, trace the entry. I want to know exactly when and where the sign reversal occurred. David Kim's fingers were already moving across his keyboard with the mechanical intensity of a concert pianist playing a piece he'd memorized decades ago. I'm in the data entry log, looking for the Meridian asset position. There. He leaned closer to his center monitor. Entry was modified on August 14th at 11:42 p.m. Single field edit. The user changed the sign from positive to negative. Who made the edit? Victor asked. His voice had the careful neutrality of a man standing very close to the edge of something. David hesitated. The edit was made under a batch processing account. Generic login. No individual user attribution. So we can't tell who did it, Rachel said. We can tell that it was a manual edit, not an automated calculation, David replied. Someone sat down at a terminal and changed that number by hand. The room absorbed this information the way dry wood absorbs a spark. Slowly at first, then all at once. Scarlett pressed her thumbnail into her index finger. The skin turned white, then pink, then white again. Walk me through the downstream impact, she said. Every report that references this line. What followed was 2 hours of the most painstaking financial forensics Scarlett had ever witnessed. David and Rachel traced the reverse number through every calculation, every summary, every projection, every report that had been generated since August 14th. The damage was staggering. The single reversed entry had infected the Q3 earnings report, the year-end forecast, the debt-to-equity analysis, the investor presentations, and, most critically, the solvency assessment that had triggered the bankruptcy filing. Every single one of those documents reflected a company that was $87.3 million further in the hole than it actually was. And because that entry fed into ratio calculations and cascading formulas, the total distortion across all affected reports was closer to $300 million. $300 million of phantom losses, created by a single keystroke. This changes the solvency calculation, Rachel said, and there was something in her voice that Scarlett had never heard before. Something that sounded almost like fear. If we correct this entry and rerun the solvency model, Scarlett, the company might not be insolvent. Victor sat down heavily in his chair. He looked like a man who had just been told that the building he was standing in had been built on a fault line. How? He said. Not a question. A demand. How did 3 audit firms miss this? Because nobody audits data entry logs, Marcus said from his corner. Everyone turned to look at him. He shrugged, his eyes still on his screen. Auditors verify calculations. They verify that the math is correct given the inputs. They don't go back and check whether the inputs themselves were entered correctly. That's a data integrity issue, not an audit issue. Different discipline entirely. So the math was right, Scarlett said slowly. The math was always right. The problem was that the math was being applied to a number that was wrong from the start. Exactly, Marcus said. Garbage in, garbage out. Oldest problem in computing. Scarlett turned to look at Noah. He was still sitting against the wall, his hands folded in his lap, his face unreadable. He hadn't said a word in 2 hours. He had just watched, the way he always watched, quietly, carefully, from the edges of a world that had never invited him in. How did you catch it? She asked. Noah shifted in his chair. He looked uncomfortable with the attention, the way some people look uncomfortable in bright light. I told you, I clean that conference room 3 nights a week. Your team leaves reports on the table. I'm not trying to read them. I'm just picking them up to wipe down the surface. But the numbers are right there. And I used to help my father with the books for his hardware store when I was a kid. He taught me that if a number looks wrong, it probably is wrong. That meridian number it didn't look right. I couldn't tell you why at first. It just felt off, like when you hear a song and one note is flat. You can't always explain what's wrong, but you know something is. Rachel Torres stared at him from across the room. Her expression had shifted from fury to something more complex. A mixture of professional humiliation and reluctant admiration that she was clearly trying very hard not to show. A hardware store, she said quietly. You learn to read financials at a hardware store. I learned to pay attention at a hardware store, Noah corrected. The financials part was just paying attention to the right thing. Scarlett called the emergency board meeting for 4 o'clock that afternoon. By 3:30, 8 of the 12 board members had arrived, along with the company's outside legal counsel and a representative from the lead auditing firm who looked like he was already mentally composing his letter of resignation. The boardroom was on the 33rd floor, 1 level above Scarlett's office. and it was designed to intimidate. Mahogany table, leather chairs, oil paintings on the walls that nobody actually looked at, but that cost more than most people's houses. Scarlett stood at the head of the table and laid out the findings with the precision of a surgeon describing a procedure. No emotion, no editorializing, just facts, one after another, stacked like bricks. The response was about what she expected. "You're telling us," said Gerald Pace, the board's longest-serving member at 71 years old, "that this entire bankruptcy, this entire catastrophe, was caused by a typo." "It was caused by a data entry error that was never caught," Scarlett said. "Whether it was an accident or deliberate remains under investigation." "And it was discovered by whom, exactly?" Scarlett paused. She knew this was coming. She had rehearsed this moment in her head during the elevator ride up, trying different framings, different ways to present the information that might soften the inevitable reaction. She had abandoned all of them. There was no way to soften it. "A member of our maintenance staff." The room went very still. Gerald Pace removed his glasses and cleaned them on his tie, which was something he did when he was trying not to say something he would regret. "A janitor," said Linda Chen, the board's newest member at 45 Chen. She was a venture capitalist who had joined the board 6 months ago, and she had the kind of direct, unvarnished communication style that some people called refreshing and others called brutal. "A janitor found a $300 million error that your CFO and 3 audit firms missed." "That's correct," Scarlett said. "And you're presenting this as good news?" "I'm presenting it as the truth. The good news is that if the corrected numbers hold, this company is not insolvent. The bankruptcy filing can potentially be reversed. We have a path forward." "The good news," Gerald said, putting his glasses back on, "is that we're not dead. The bad news is that we were pronounced dead by every expert in the room, and the only person who thought to check our pulse was the man mopping the floors." Scarlett's jaw tightened. She wanted to defend her team. She wanted to point out that the error was extraordinarily well hidden, that it exploited a gap between data integrity and financial auditing that was systemic, not personal. She wanted to say that this wasn't anyone's fault, but that wasn't true. It was someone's fault. It was many people's fault. And standing here pretending otherwise would only make things worse. "You're right," she said, "and I'm going to fix it." "How?" Linda asked. "By doing what I should have done years ago, rebuilding the oversight structure from the ground up, and starting with the culture that made this possible." Gerald leaned back in his chair. "Scarlett, I've known you since you were 12 years old and your father brought you to the company Christmas party in a dress you hated. You are brilliant, you're driven, and you are, when you need to be, the most stubborn human being I have ever encountered. But what you are describing is not a systems failure. It is a leadership failure. And leadership failures don't fix themselves with new org charts." "I know." "Do you?" Scarlett met his eyes. Gerald Pace had known her father for 40 years. He had held her mother's hand at the hospital when Scarlett was born. He had written her a letter of recommendation for college, and a different kind of letter after her mother died. The kind you write when words are inadequate, but silence is worse. He was not going to go easy on her. He never had. "I know," she said again. And this time she meant it in a way that reached all the way down to the bottom of whatever was left inside her. The sun was going down by the time the board meeting ended. No decisions had been finalized. The legal team needed to assess the feasibility of reversing the bankruptcy filing, and the corrected numbers had to be independently verified before anyone could make public statements. But the atmosphere had shifted. There was still anger, still fear, still the acrid smell of institutional humiliation. But underneath all of that, there was something else, a crack in the wall, a sliver of light where before there had been only darkness. Scarlett found Noah in the lobby. He was sitting on one of the benches near the entrance, the same bench where visitors waited for their badges in the morning. His gray uniform shirt was wrinkled. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that lives deeper, in the muscles and the bones, the kind that comes from years of carrying more than one person should carry alone. She sat down next to him, not across from him, not at a professional distance. Next to him, the way you sit next to someone when the pretense of hierarchy feels suddenly absurd. The board is reviewing the corrected data, she said. If it holds, there's a chance we can pull this back. Noah nodded. He was looking at his hands. They were big hands, calloused, with a scar across the knuckle of his left ring finger that looked like an old story. That's good, he said. That's because of you. He shook his head. I just pointed at a number. Your people did the rest. You pointed at a number that no one else in this building, you see, no one with a title, no one with a degree, no one with a six-figure salary and a corner office bothered to look at. That's not a small thing, Mr. Bennett. Noah. She paused. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you come to me? You could have gone to your supervisor. You could have sent an email. You could have done nothing at all and gone home to your daughter and let this company collapse. Why me? Noah was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more careful, as if he was choosing each word the way you choose your footing on ice. Because I've been invisible in this building for 3 years. I've cleaned every office, every bathroom, every conference room. I've emptied trash cans next to people having conversations about billions of dollars, and not once has anyone looked at me. Not once has anyone asked my name. And I was fine with that. I didn't take this job to make friends. I took it because it pays decent. The hours work with my daughter's schedule, and nobody bothers me. He paused, rubbed the scar on his knuckle. But when I found that number, when I realized what it meant, I couldn't just walk away. Because I kept thinking about all the people who work here, the ones who have families, kids, mortgages, the ones who are going to lose everything because of a mistake that nobody caught. And I thought, if I don't say something, who will? Because nobody looks at me, right? Nobody thinks the janitor has anything worth hearing. But that doesn't mean I don't have eyes. It doesn't mean I can't read. It doesn't mean I don't care what happens to the people in this building. He looked at her for the first time since she'd sat down. I came to you because you were the only one still standing in the lobby when everyone else had already left. And I figured if the CEO is the last person to leave, then maybe the CEO is the one who cares the most. Scarlett felt something shift inside her chest. Not a dramatic, cinematic revelation. Something quieter. Something that hurt the way truth hurts when you've been avoiding it for a long time. She had built this company into a machine. An efficient, hierarchical, perfectly structured machine where information flowed upward through approved channels, where decisions were made by credentialed experts, where every voice was weighted by title and tenure and the size of the office it came from. And that machine had almost killed the company. Because in a machine that only listened to certain voices, the voice that mattered most had been invisible. She didn't say any of this, not yet. The words weren't ready. They were still forming, still raw, still too close to the bone to be spoken out loud. Instead, she said, "Thank you, Noah." He nodded. Then he stood up, straightened his uniform shirt, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Scarlett asked. "Home. My daughter has school in the morning, and Mrs. Delgado has been watching her since last night. I need to get back." He was almost at the door when he stopped and turned around. "Miss Hayes? Scarlett?" A pause. Just a flicker of surprise, quickly hidden. "Scarlett, for what it's worth, I hope the numbers hold. This building's got a lot of good people in it. They deserve better than what happened today." And then he was gone, out through the smudged glass doors and into the gray evening, a janitor in a wrinkled uniform going home to his daughter, leaving behind a lobby that was exactly as empty as it had been that morning. Except that now, somehow, everything in it felt different. Scarlett sat on the bench for a long time after he left. She watched the last of the daylight drain from the windows, and the city lights start to flicker on, one by one, like a slow constellation assembling itself against the dark. She pressed her thumbnail into her index finger, then she stopped. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in weeks. "Victor, it's Scarlett. I need you to set up a meeting with outside legal first thing tomorrow morning. And I need the full data entry audit log for every manual edit made to the Meridian accounts between June and September. Every single one." She paused. "And Victor? Find out who made that entry on August 14th. I don't care how long it takes. Find out." She hung up and stared at the empty lobby. Somewhere in the building, a floor buffer hummed to life. The night shift starting its work, invisible and essential, like a heartbeat you never notice until it stops. Scarlett stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the elevator. There was a lot of work to do. The meeting with outside legal counsel started at 7:15 the following morning in a conference room that smelled like stale air and fresh anxiety. Scarlett had arrived at 6, alone, carrying 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with too much cream, because she hadn't been able to decide which version of herself she needed to be today. The woman who ran on discipline and darkness, or the woman who was quietly falling apart and needed something to soften the edges. She drank the black one first, then she drank the other one too. By the time the attorneys arrived, Martin Ashford from Ashford & Crane, a firm that had represented Hayes Global for over a decade, and his associate, a young woman named Priya Sandoval, who carried 3 binders and a tablet and looked like she hadn't slept either. Scarlett had already reviewed the corrected solvency projections twice and made notes in the margins with a red pen that was running low on ink. "Walk me through the options," Scarlett said before Martin had even finished settling into his chair. Martin Ashford was 63, silver-haired, and had the kind of measured, deliberate speaking style that either inspired confidence or drove you insane, depending on how urgently you needed answers. Today, it drove Scarlett insane. "Well," he began, folding his hands on the table, "the situation is, to put it mildly, unprecedented. The bankruptcy filing was submitted to the court yesterday morning based on financial data that we now believe contained a material error. If the corrected data demonstrates that Hayes Global is in fact solvent, we have grounds to petition the court for a withdrawal of the voluntary filing under Section 305, or alternatively, to seek a dismissal under Section 707. How long? The petition itself can be drafted within 48 hours, but the court will require independent verification of the corrected financials before ruling. That could take 2 to 4 weeks, possibly longer if the trustee objects." 2 to 4 weeks? Scarlett set her coffee cup down hard enough that the ceramic clicked against the table. "Martin, I have creditors calling me every 15 minutes. I have investors threatening to file lawsuits. I have 1,100 employees who went home yesterday thinking they no longer have jobs. I don't have 2 to 4 weeks. I understand the urgency, Scarlett, but the court doesn't operate on corporate timelines. What I can do is file an emergency motion requesting an expedited review, citing the discovery of material error. If the judge is sympathetic, and Judge Harmon tends to be pragmatic about these things, we might get a hearing within the week." Priya Sandoval looked up from her tablet. "There's another issue. The public filing is already on record. Every news outlet in the country reported the bankruptcy yesterday. Even if we reverse the filing legally, the reputational damage is already done. Investors, partners, clients, they've all seen the headline. Unwinding the narrative is going to be significantly harder than unwinding the paperwork." Scarlett knew this. She had thought about almost nothing else during the 3 hours she'd spent lying awake in bed the previous night, staring at the ceiling of her apartment while the city hummed outside her window. The legal problem was solvable. The financial problem was solvable. The story that was already spreading through every business news feed and Twitter thread and analyst report, that was the problem that could still kill them. Because the story wasn't just about a data entry error. The story was about a company so broken that a janitor had to save it, and no amount of legal maneuvering could make that story go away. "Draft the emergency motion," Scarlett said. "Get it filed today. Priya, I want a communications strategy on my desk by noon, talking points for investors, clients, and media. We control this narrative, or it controls us." Martin nodded. Priya wrote something on her tablet. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, covering legal exposure, potential lawsuits from investors who had made decisions based on the erroneous bankruptcy, and the question of whether the data entry error constituted fraud or negligence, a distinction that would determine whether this ended in regulatory fines or criminal charges. When the lawyers left, Scarlett sat alone in the conference room and pressed her thumbnail into her index finger until a crescent-shaped mark appeared on the skin. Her phone buzzed. A text from Victor Jung. "We need to talk. My office. Now." She stared at the message for 10 seconds, then stood up and walked to the elevator. Victor's office was on the 31st floor, one level below Scarlett's, a geographical arrangement that had always struck her as perfectly symbolic of their relationship, close enough to be essential, just far enough to remind everyone who was in charge. When she walked in, Victor was standing behind his desk with his jacket off and his tie loosened, which for Victor Zheng was the equivalent of a complete emotional breakdown. His face had a grayish tint, and the skin under his eyes looked bruised from lack of sleep. "Close the door," he said. Scarlett closed the door and sat down in the chair opposite his desk without being invited. They had known each other long enough to skip the courtesies. "I found who made the entry," Victor said. Scarlett's stomach tightened. She kept her expression neutral, but her body understood what was coming before her brain did. "Who?" Victor sat down slowly. He placed both hands flat on the desk, fingers spread, as if he was trying to keep the surface from moving. "It was Jason Wexler." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Jason Wexler, senior financial controller, 22 years with the company, a man who had sat in the chair where Scarlett was sitting now more times than she could count, delivering quarterly reports with the calm assurance of someone who believed that numbers were the closest thing the universe had to absolute truth. "Jason," Scarlett repeated. His credentials were used to access the batch processing system on August 14th. The IP address traces back to his workstation, and when I pulled the access logs for that evening, his badge was the only one scanned into the building between 10 p.m. and midnight. "Does he know you found this?" "Not yet. He called in sick this morning, which is the first sick day he's taken in 4 years. Scarlett leaned back in her chair and exhaled through her nose. The implications were spreading through her mind like cracks in glass. If Jason Wexler, a trusted, senior, deeply embedded member of the finance team, had deliberately reversed that number, this wasn't a mistake. This was sabotage. And sabotage meant motive. And motive meant a story that was far more complicated and far more dangerous than a simple accounting error. "Have you told anyone else?" she asked. "No, I wanted to talk to you first." "Good. Don't tell anyone. Not Rachel, not the board, not the lawyers, not until we understand why he did it." Victor's jaw clenched. "Scarlett, if this was intentional, if Jason deliberately falsified financial data to make the company appear insolvent, that is a federal crime. We have a legal obligation to report it." "I know our obligations, Victor, but I also know that if this goes public before we understand the full picture, it will create a firestorm that makes yesterday look like a campfire. I'm not covering anything up. I'm asking for 24 hours to get the facts straight before we light a match in a room full of gasoline." Victor studied her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face, determination, desperation, or some combustible mixture of both, seemed to satisfy him. 24 hours, he said. "Then I go to legal whether you're ready or not." "Fair enough." She stood and walked toward the door, then stopped. "Victor, how well do you know Jason? Personally, I mean." Victor's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, or guilt. It was hard to tell with Victor. His face had spent so many years being professionally neutral that genuine emotion looked foreign on it, like a word from a language he'd once spoken but had mostly forgotten. "I hired him," Victor said quietly. 22 years ago. He was the best candidate I'd ever interviewed. Meticulous, disciplined, never made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Not Jason. That's what made him exceptional, and that's what makes this so hard to believe." Scarlett nodded and left the office. In the elevator, she leaned against the back wall and closed her eyes. The fluorescent light above her hummed, that same low mechanical drone, and for a moment she let herself feel the full weight of what was happening. The betrayal, the absurdity, the fact that her company had been pushed to the edge of destruction not by market forces or bad strategy, but by the deliberate act of a man she had trusted implicitly. She opened her eyes when the elevator doors opened on the ground floor. Through the lobby windows, she could see a cluster of reporters on the sidewalk, their cameras pointed at the building like weapons. She turned away from the windows and took the service corridor toward the back exit. That was where she found Noah. He was in the maintenance hallway behind the main lobby, loading supplies onto a cart, paper towels, cleaning solution, trash bags. He was wearing the same gray uniform shirt, freshly laundered, and he had the focused, unhurried manner of a man who did his work the same way every day, regardless of whether the building around him was thriving or collapsing. "Noah." He looked up. If he was surprised to see the CEO of the company standing in a maintenance corridor, he didn't show it. "Morning." "What are you doing here? Your shift doesn't start until tonight." My supervisor called, said half the day crew didn't show up. People are scared. They figure if the company's going under, why bother coming in? He shrugged. Somebody's got to keep the lights on. Scarlett watched him arrange the supplies on his cart with the careful precision of someone who took pride in work that most people considered beneath their notice. She thought about what Gerald Pace had said at the board meeting, that this wasn't a systems failure, it was a leadership failure. And she thought about how Noah had been in this building for 3 years, invisible, essential, and utterly disregarded. Can I talk to you for a minute? Noah looked at her, then at his cart, then back at her. Sure, but I need to finish this floor by 11. I'll walk with you. They moved through the maintenance corridor together, the CEO in her tailored blazer and heels, the janitor pushing a supply cart with a squeaky left wheel. It was absurd. Scarlett knew it was absurd. She didn't care. The corrected numbers are holding, she said. Our lawyers are filing an emergency motion to reverse the bankruptcy. If the court approves, the company survives. That's good news. It's complicated news. The error wasn't random, Noah. It was deliberate. Someone inside the company changed that number on purpose. Noah's cart stopped moving. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something hard in his eyes. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Something protective. Who? I can't tell you that yet, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I'm always honest. It's easier to keep track of. When you first noticed the discrepancy in the reports, was there anything else, anything that seemed off? Notes in the margins, conversations you overheard, anything at all? Noah was quiet for a moment. He rubbed the scar on his left knuckle, the old one, the one Scarlett had noticed in the lobby, and she could see him thinking, turning something over in his mind the way you turn a puzzle piece, looking for the angle that makes it fit. There was one thing, he said slowly. About 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning the 14th floor, same as always. It was late, say maybe 11:30, and there was someone in the conference room, which was weird because usually that floor is empty by 9. Did you see who it was? Not clearly. The door was mostly closed, but I could hear them talking on the phone, a man's voice, and he said something that stuck with me because it didn't sound right. What did he say? He said, "It's already in the system. By the time anyone catches it, there won't be anything left to save." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Scarlett felt her pulse accelerate, a dull, heavy thudding in her chest that had nothing to do with caffeine and everything to do with the realization that the crisis she was managing was deeper and darker than she had allowed herself to believe. "Did you recognize the voice?" "No. I only heard that one sentence before I moved on. I didn't think much of it at the time. People in this building say dramatic things on the phone all the time. I figured it was some executive talking about a deal. But now? Now it sounds different. Now it sounds like someone knew exactly what they were doing." Scarlett nodded slowly. She was building a picture in her mind. Not a clear one, not yet, but the outlines were taking shape the way a photograph develops in a darkroom, shadows and light gradually separating into recognizable forms. "Noah, I need you to do something for me. And I know this isn't part of your job, and I know you have every reason to say no." He waited. "I need you to keep your eyes open, the same way you always have. If you see anything, anyone in the building late at night who shouldn't be there, anything left behind in the conference rooms, any conversation that doesn't sound right, I need you to come directly to me. Not your supervisor, not security, me. You're asking a janitor to be your spy. I'm asking the most observant person in this building to keep doing what he's already doing. The only difference is that now, someone's actually listening." Noah studied her face for a long time. He had the kind of gaze that didn't rush. It settled, took its time, saw what it needed to see before committing to a response. It occurred to Scarlett that this was probably how he'd caught the error in the first place. Not through brilliance or training, but through the simple, rare discipline of actually paying attention. "Okay," he said finally, "but I have one condition." "Name it." "My daughter, Lily. She's 6 and she's my whole world. If this goes sideways, if someone finds out I'm involved in whatever this is, I need to know that she's protected. I don't care what happens to me, but she's not part of this. Something cracked inside Scarlett's chest, a hairline fracture in the wall she had built around herself. The wall that kept her functioning, kept her sharp, kept her from drowning in the ocean of responsibility and exhaustion and loneliness that was her daily existence. A man who had nothing was willing to risk what little he had, and his only condition was the safety of a 6-year-old girl he loved more than his own life. "Nothing will happen to Lily," Scarlett said. "You have my word." Noah nodded. He picked up the handle of his cart, and the squeaky left wheel started up again, a small, persistent sound that echoed through the empty corridor. "I need to finish this floor," he said. Scarlett stepped aside to let him pass. As he moved down the hallway, she called after him. "Noah!" He stopped but didn't turn around. "The conference room on the 14th floor, the night you heard that voice. Can you remember exactly what date that was?" He turned his head slightly. "August 14th. I remember because it was my daughter's birthday, and I was trying to finish early so I could get home and set up her presents before she woke up." August 14th. The same night the entry was changed. Scarlett stood in the maintenance corridor for a full minute after Noah disappeared around the corner. Her mind was racing, but her body was perfectly still. The practiced stillness of a woman who had learned to contain explosions inside herself the way a reactor contains a chain reaction. Someone had deliberately sabotaged Hayes Global Industries. Someone who had access to the financial systems, the building, and the confidence that no one would ever look closely enough to catch what they'd done. And the only person who had looked closely enough was a janitor who should have been home watching his daughter blow out birthday candles. Scarlett pulled out her phone and typed a message to Victor. August 14th, the night of the entry. Pull the security footage for the 14th floor, all cameras, 10 p.m. to midnight. She put the phone away and walked toward the elevator. The reporters were still clustered outside the front entrance, visible through the lobby windows like a pack of animals waiting at a watering hole. Inside the building, the few employees who had shown up were moving through the hallways with the stunned, shuffling gait of people navigating a disaster zone. But somewhere in this building, in a database that nobody had thought to check, in a camera feed that nobody had thought to watch, in a phone call that nobody had thought to listen to, the truth was waiting. And Scarlett Hayes, for the first time in her career, was done trusting the people who were supposed to find it. She was going to find it herself. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. As they closed, her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Leave it alone, Scarlett. Some numbers are better left buried." She read it twice. Then she screenshot it, forwarded it to her personal email, and deleted the message from her phone. Her thumb found the side of her index finger and pressed hard until the skin went white. The elevator climbed toward the 32nd floor, and Scarlett Hayes stood inside it like a woman standing inside the barrel of a loaded gun, perfectly still, perfectly aware, and absolutely certain that the only way out was forward. The security footage arrived on Scarlett's laptop at 9:17 that evening. 4 camera angles covering the 14th floor hallway, the conference room entrance, the elevator bank, and the stairwell door. Victor had sent the files without commentary, just a single line in the email. Watch camera 3 first. Scarlett sat in her office with the blinds drawn and the overhead lights off, the laptop screen casting a bluish glow across her face. She clicked on camera 3, the conference room entrance, and scrubbed the timeline to 10 p.m. on August 14th. For 20 minutes, nothing. An empty hallway. The cleaning cart parked near the water fountain, which meant Noah had been somewhere on the floor. Then, at 10:22, a figure appeared from the direction of the stairwell. Male. Average height, dark suit. He moved quickly, with the purposeful stride of someone who knew exactly where he was going and didn't want to be seen going there. The camera angle caught his profile as he pushed open the conference room door. The image was grainy. Building security cameras weren't built for forensic identification, but it was clear enough. Jason Wexler. Scarlett paused the footage and stared at the frozen frame. Jason's face was half turned toward the camera, his expression tight with concentration. He was carrying a laptop under one arm. In his other hand, he held a phone pressed to his ear. She hit play again. Jason disappeared into the conference room. The door closed behind him. For the next hour and 14 minutes, nothing moved in the hallway except Noah, who appeared briefly at 10:51, pushing his cart past the conference room door without stopping, then again at 11:28, pausing just long enough to adjust something on his cart before continuing toward the elevator bank. That was it. That was the moment Noah had described. Passing the conference room, hearing a voice through the partially closed door. A sentence that meant nothing at the time and everything now. It's already in the system. By the time anyone catches it, there won't be anything left to save. At 11:36, Jason Wexler emerged from the conference room. He was no longer carrying the laptop. He walked directly to the stairwell, not the elevator, and disappeared through the door. The stairwell camera caught him descending 3 flights before the angle lost him. Scarlett closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. She had known Jason Wexler for her entire tenure as CEO. He had been one of the first senior leaders to publicly support her appointment after her father's stroke, when half the board was arguing that a 26-year-old had no business running a company with 1,100 employees and a presence in 14 countries. Jason had stood up in a boardroom full of skeptics and said, "She's Richard's daughter. That's good enough for me." And now she was looking at security footage of that same man walking into a conference room at 10 o'clock at night to destroy the company from the inside. The question that kept circling her mind, the one she couldn't answer, couldn't even begin to approach, was why? Jason Wexler had spent 22 years at Hayes Global. His salary was generous. His pension was secure. His reputation was built entirely on his work at this company. What possible reason could he have for engineering its collapse? She picked up her phone and called Victor. "Did you watch it?" she asked. "I watched it 3 times. Victor's voice sounded hollow, stripped of its usual precision. "It's him. There's no ambiguity. I need his personnel file. Everything. Compensation history, performance reviews, any disciplinary actions, any complaints filed by him or against him. And I need his financial records, personal accounts, investment portfolios, anything we have access to through the company's background check protocols. Scarlett, I can pull the personnel file, but personal financial records are going to require legal authorization. If Jason has an attorney, he doesn't know we're looking, not yet. Pull what you can legally access and flag the rest for the lawyers. I want it by morning." And then what? And then I'm going to sit down across from him and ask him to his face. Victor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had a quality she'd never heard from him before. Something tentative, almost fragile, like a man testing the weight of a bridge before stepping onto it. "Scarlett, I need to tell you something, and I should have told you earlier." She waited. 6 months ago, Jason came to me with a proposal. He wanted to restructure the company's asset valuation methodology, change the way we calculate net positions on acquisitions. He argued that our current system was outdated, that it was creating inaccuracies that could lead to material misstatements. And you said no. I said no. I told him the current methodology was industry standard, that changing it would require board approval and independent verification, and that I didn't see sufficient justification. He pushed back, hard. We had several heated conversations about it, and then he stopped bringing it up, and I assumed he'd accepted my decision. "You assumed?" "Yes, I assumed. And I should not have assumed. I should have followed up. I should have paid closer attention to what he was doing after I shut him down. But I didn't, because I trusted him. The same way I trusted the audit reports. The same way I trusted the system." The parallel hung in the air between them, unspoken, painful, unavoidable. Victor had trusted Jason the way Scarlett had trusted Victor, and Jason had trusted whatever twisted logic had convinced him that destroying a company was the correct response to being told no. "We all trusted the system," Scarlett said. "That's the problem." She hung up and sat in the dark office, listening to the building settle around her. The clicks and hums and distant mechanical sighs of a structure that kept functioning whether anyone was paying attention or not. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, expecting another message from the unknown number, but it was a text from a contact saved as Lily's dad, a name she had entered into her phone that afternoon without really thinking about why she'd chosen to identify Noah by his relationship to his daughter rather than by his own name. 14th floor is clean. Nothing unusual tonight. Heading home. She typed back, "Thank you. Get some rest." Then she added, Tell Lily her dad is braver than he knows. She stared at that last line for 5 seconds before deleting it. Too personal. Too much. She sent only the first message and set the phone face down on her desk. The next morning, Scarlett arrived at the office at 5:30 and found Rachel Torres already waiting outside her door. Rachel was holding a manila folder and wearing an expression that suggested she had either discovered something important or was about to resign. Possibly both. "I need 10 minutes," Rachel said. "Come in." Rachel sat down and opened the folder on Scarlett's desk. Inside were printouts of internal email threads, highlighted in yellow and annotated in Rachel's sharp, angular handwriting. "I went back through Jason's email activity over the past 6 months," Rachel said. "I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just looking, and I found a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" "Jason has been communicating with an external email address, a personal Gmail account, about company financial data. The emails are vague enough to avoid triggering our compliance filters, but when you read them in sequence, the intent is clear. He was sharing information about the company's financial position with someone outside the organization." "Who?" "I don't know yet. The Gmail account is registered to a generic name, John Smith, if you can believe that. But the content of the email suggests a professional relationship. Whoever this person is, they understand corporate finance at a sophisticated level." Scarlett picked up one of the printouts and read the highlighted passage. It was from an email dated July 23rd, 6 weeks before the data entry was changed. "The position is vulnerable. If the Q3 numbers reflect the adjustment, the solvency threshold drops below critical. The filing becomes inevitable. Timeline is on track." She read it again, then a third time. Each reading made the words heavier, denser, more damning. "He planned this," Scarlett said. "This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He spent months setting it up. At minimum. And whoever he's working with knew exactly what the impact would be. They understood that a single reversed entry, placed in the right location, would cascade through the entire reporting system and trigger a bankruptcy that looked legitimate from every angle. Except one. Except a janitor who cleans conference rooms 3 nights a week." Rachel paused. She seemed to be wrestling with something, some internal conflict between professional pride and intellectual honesty. "Scarlett, I owe you an apology. When Noah Bennett walked into that conference room yesterday and started questioning the numbers, I wanted to throw him out. I was furious. I took it as a personal insult that someone with no financial training could see something my team had missed. And I was wrong. If he hadn't caught that error, we would be in court right now, liquidating assets and laying off every person in this building. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to him." Rachel's mouth tightened, but she nodded. "Fair. What do we know about motive? Why would Jason want to bankrupt the company he's spent his career building?" "I have a theory, and you're not going to like it. I haven't liked anything I've heard in the last 48 hours. Go ahead." Rachel pulled another document from the folder, a corporate filing from the State Secretary of State's office, dated 14 months ago. Jason Wexler is a minority shareholder in a company called Pinnacle Capital Partners. Pinnacle is an investment firm that specializes in distressed asset acquisition. They buy companies that are going through bankruptcy, strip them for parts, and sell off the pieces at a profit. The room went very quiet. Scarlett could hear her own breathing. She could hear the fluorescent light above her desk buzzing at a frequency that seemed to sync with the ringing in her ears. "He was going to buy his own company," she said. Not a question, a realization, the kind that arrives fully formed, heavy and ugly and obvious in retrospect. The kind that makes you wonder how you could have missed it when all the pieces were right there in front of you the entire time. Through Pinnacle? Yes. Once the bankruptcy was finalized and the assets were up for sale, Pinnacle would have been positioned to acquire key divisions at a fraction of their actual value. Jason's share of the profits would have been substantial. We're talking tens of millions. Scarlett stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below her, all glass and concrete and ambition, and for a moment she hated every square foot of it. She hated the buildings and the streets, and the people moving through them on their way to jobs where they trusted their colleagues and their systems and their leaders to do the right thing, because trust was the whole problem. Trust was the thing she had built her company on, and trust was the weapon Jason Wexler had used to tear it apart. "Call the lawyers," she said, her back still to Rachel, And call the FBI. This isn't a corporate matter anymore. This is fraud. Rachel gathered her folder and stood. At the door, she paused. Scarlett, there's one more thing. What? The anonymous text you received yesterday. The one that told you to leave it alone. I had IT trace the number. It's a burner phone, Assam, no registered owner. But the cell tower data shows the call originated from within a 2-block radius of Jason Wexler's home address. Scarlett's thumbnail dug into her index finger. The crescent mark was becoming permanent, a small white scar that would eventually be visible even when she wasn't pressing. Thank you, Rachel. I'll have the FBI contact information to you within the hour. The door closed. Scarlett remained at the window, staring at nothing, feeling everything. She had built Hayes Global Industries into a machine, an elegant, efficient, ruthlessly organized machine that processed information through approved channels and generated decisions through credentialed experts and produced results through hierarchical systems that had been responsive and optimized over decades. And one man, one trusted, credentialed, deeply embedded man, had used that machine against itself. He had exploited the very efficiency she was so proud of, the very trust she had cultivated, the very systems she had designed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe. He had turned her greatest strengths into her most devastating vulnerabilities, and the only person who had seen through it was a man the machine was designed to ignore. At 11 o'clock that morning, Scarlett walked into the small conference room on the 31st floor where Jason Wexler was waiting. He had been called in for what he believed was a routine debrief about the corrected financials, a meeting that Victor had scheduled with carefully neutral language designed to avoid arousing suspicion. Jason was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, looking exactly the way he always looked, composed, professional, mildly bored. He was 54, trim, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the appearance of an academic rather than a corporate financial controller. He had the kind of face that inspired trust by default, the kind of face that people looked at and instinctively categorized as honest, competent, reliable. Scarlett sat down across from him. Victor was already seated at the end of the table, his hands folded in front of him, his expression carefully blank. "Jason, thank you for coming in," Scarlett said. "Of course. I heard about the corrected numbers. Incredible that it was missed. I've been going through my own records to see if there's anything I should have caught." He said this with such natural concern, such seamless professionalism, that Scarlett almost admired the performance. Almost. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," she said. The entry that was changed, the Meridian asset position, was modified on August 14th at 11:42 p.m. from a batch processing terminal on the 14th floor. She watched his face. Nothing moved. Not a twitch, not a flicker, not the slightest disruption in the surface of his composure. He was good. He was very good. "That's concerning," Jason said. "Do we know who made the edit?" "We do." Scarlett placed the security footage screenshot on the table between them. Jason entering the conference room. Timestamp clearly visible. His face in profile. Unmistakable. Jason looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. Longer than a surprised person would look at it. Longer than an innocent person would need to understand what they were seeing. He looked at it the way a chess player looks at a board when they realize they've been outmaneuvered. Then he looked up at Scarlett. "I'd like to speak with an attorney." "I'm sure you would, and you'll have that opportunity. But right now, in this room, I'm not asking you as your CEO. I'm asking you as the daughter of the man who built this company, the man who trusted you for 22 years, the man who is sitting in a care facility in Connecticut right now, unable to speak, unable to walk, unable to know that the company he spent his life building was nearly destroyed by someone he considered family." She hadn't planned to say that. The words came from somewhere deep and raw, somewhere she didn't usually access during business hours. She could feel Victor shift uncomfortably in his peripheral vision. Jason's composure cracked. It didn't shatter. He was too controlled for that. But a fracture appeared, a thin line running through the surface like a crack in porcelain. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved to the photograph on the table, then to his hands, then to some undefined point on the wall behind Scarlett's head. "Your father," he said quietly, "was the best man I ever worked for. And when he got sick, I assumed you would ask me to help run the company. I had 20 years of experience. I knew every system, every process, every number, and every report. I was the obvious choice. But I didn't ask you." "No, you didn't. You brought in Victor, an outsider, someone who had never worked a single day inside these walls. And you gave him the authority that should have been mine." Victor's hands unfolded on the table. His face remained blank, but Scarlett could see the muscles in his forearms tighten. "So this was about ego," Scarlett said. "Don't reduce it to that. Don't you dare reduce it to that." Jason's voice hardened, and for the first time Scarlett heard something beneath the professional veneer, something bitter and corrosive that had been eating at him for years. "I gave this company everything. I gave it my career, my marriage, my health. My wife left me because I was here until midnight every night making sure the numbers were right. And when the time came for someone to recognize that sacrifice, you looked right through me. The same way everyone in this building looks through anyone who doesn't have the right title or the right degree or the right last name." The words hit Scarlett with a force she wasn't prepared for. Not because they justified what Jason had done. Nothing could justify what he had done. But because they illuminated something she had been avoiding for longer than she wanted to admit. The culture she had built, the hierarchy she had enforced, the invisible lines she had drawn between the people who mattered and the people who didn't. Jason had crossed one of those lines in the worst possible way, but the lines themselves, the fact that they existed, the fact that she had created them, that was on her. "You're right," she said. "I didn't see you. And I'm sorry for that. But what you did, what you planned, would have destroyed 1,100 people's livelihoods, families, mortgages, college funds, children. You were willing to burn all of that because you felt overlooked." Jason said nothing. His jaw worked silently, grinding against itself. "Pinnacle Capital Partners," Scarlett continued. "You were going to buy the company's assets out of bankruptcy, strip them, sell them off, profit from the destruction you engineered." For the first time, real fear appeared in Jason's eyes. The mention of Pinnacle meant she knew everything. Not just the what, but the why, and the how, and the who. "I want a lawyer," he said again. But the words had lost their authority. They sounded like what they were, a man retreating behind a wall he already knew wouldn't hold. "You'll get one," Scarlett said. She stood up. "The FBI will be here this afternoon. I suggest you use the time to think carefully about how much you want to cooperate." She walked out of the conference room without looking back. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and let her head fall backward until it touched the cool surface. She closed her eyes. Her hands were shaking, not visibly, not in a way anyone walking past would notice, but internally, deep in the tendons and the small muscles, the way a building shakes during an earthquake that only the instruments can detect. Victor appeared beside her a moment later. "That was harder than I expected," he said. "Which part?" "The part where he was right. About being overlooked. About giving everything and getting nothing in return." Victor paused. "He was right about that. He was wrong about everything else. But he was right about that." Scarlett opened her eyes and looked at Victor. Really looked at him. The way she had looked at Noah in the lobby 2 days ago. The way she was slowly learning to look at the people around her instead of through them. "How many other Jasons are there in this building, Victor? How many people have been giving everything and feeling invisible? How many of them are one bad day away from doing something desperate?" Victor didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was written in every empty desk, every unanswered phone, every silent hallway in a building that had once buzzed with the energy of 1,100 people who believed their work mattered. Scarlett pushed herself off the wall and straightened her blazer. "I'm going to fix this," she said. "Not the finances, not the legal problems. Those will take care of themselves. I'm going to fix the thing that made all of this possible. The culture. The silence. The fact that the only person in this building brave enough to speak up was a janitor who had nothing to lose because we'd never given him anything to begin with." She started walking toward the elevator, then stopped. "Victor, the employee who discovered the error, Noah Bennett. I want him in my office tomorrow morning at 9. And I want HR to prepare paperwork for a position in the Internal Oversight Division. Not maintenance, not janitorial, a real position with a real salary and a real title. On what basis? He has no financial credentials. He has something better than credentials. He has the ability to see what credentialed people can't or won't. Victor watched her walk away. He stood in the hallway for a long time after she was gone, his hands in his pockets, his face carrying an expression that was hard to name, something between admiration and grief, between the recognition of what Scarlett was becoming and the quiet acknowledgement of what he himself had failed to be. The 14th floor was empty now. The conference room where Jason Wexler had sat making a phone call on August 14th. The same room where Noah Bennett cleaned tables 3 nights a week. The same room where the corrected numbers had been spread across the table and the truth had exploded into the open, sat dark and quiet behind its closed door. But the story it contained was far from over. Noah almost didn't come. He stood outside the glass doors of Hayes Global Industries at 8:40 the following morning, wearing the only button-down shirt he owned, a pale blue Oxford he'd bought 3 years ago for a parent-teacher conference at Lily's school, and a pair of dark slacks that were slightly too long because he'd never gotten around to hemming them. His work boots had been replaced by dress shoes he'd found in the back of his closet, scuffed at the toes but passable if nobody looked too closely. He had almost called in with an excuse, almost texted Scarlett to say he wasn't feeling well, or that Lily had a doctor's appointment, or any one of a dozen lies that would have let him stay safely invisible in the life he'd built for himself. The small, careful, manageable life where nobody expected anything from him except clean floors and empty trash cans. But Mrs. Delgado had seen him standing in his kitchen that morning in the blue shirt, hesitating, and she'd said, "Noah, if you don't walk through that door, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what was on the other side of it." And then Lily had come out of her bedroom in her pajamas with her hair tangled from sleep and said, "Daddy, you look fancy." And he'd laughed for the first time in days. So here he was, standing outside a building he'd cleaned for 3 years, about to walk through the front entrance for the first time instead of the service door in the back. He pushed through the glass doors and crossed the lobby. The security guard at the front desk, a guy named Carl who usually waved Noah through the service entrance without a second glance, did a visible double take. "Bennett, that you?" "Yeah." "You look different." "I'm going to a meeting." Carl's eyebrows climbed. "A meeting? Like in a conference room? Like in the CEO's office?" Carl stared at him for a full 3 seconds, then shook his head and waved him toward the elevators. "Man, I don't even want to know." Noah rode the elevator to the 32nd floor alone. The car was quiet except for the soft mechanical hum of the cables and the faint sound of his own breathing, which was faster than he wanted it to be. He pressed his thumb against the scar on his left knuckle. His version of Scarlett's nervous habit, a gesture that grounded him when the world started feeling too large. The scar was from the hardware store. He'd been 14, helping his father replace a broken shelf bracket, and the wrench had slipped and torn a gash across his knuckle that bled so much his father had to wrap it in a shop rag and drive him to the urgent care clinic 3 blocks away. His father had held his hand in the waiting room, a big man with rough hands holding his son's injured fist like it was made of glass, and said, "Scars mean you were doing something. The people without scars are the ones who never tried." His father had died 2 years later. Heart attack in the stockroom of the hardware store, surrounded by inventory sheets and the smell of sawdust and machine oil. Noah had been 16. His mother had already been gone since he was 9. And just like that, the world had shrunk to the size of one person, standing alone, figuring out what came next. The elevator opened. Scarlett's assistant, a young woman named Claire, who had always been polite to Noah on the rare occasions their paths crossed during night shifts, looked up from her desk with an expression of careful blankness that suggested she'd been briefed on the meeting, but not on what to make of it. "Mr. Bennett? She's expecting you. Go right in." Noah walked into Scarlett's office. She was standing by the window with her arms crossed, and she turned when he entered. She looked tired. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of tired, but the real kind. The kind that showed in the slight puffiness around her eyes, and the tension in her shoulders, and the way her blazer hung just slightly off center, as if she'd put it on in a hurry and hadn't checked a mirror. "You came," she said. "I almost didn't." "What changed your mind?" "My neighbor told me I'd regret it if I didn't, and my daughter said I looked fancy. So..." Something moved across Scarlett's face. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. The suggestion that somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the weight of the last 72 hours, there was still a person capable of being caught off guard by something small and human. "Sit down, Noah." He sat. She sat across from him, not behind her desk, but in the chair beside his, which struck him as deliberate, a choice to be next to him rather than above him. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said. "I want you to join the company in a new role. Internal oversight. You'd be part of a team I'm building from scratch. Independent of finance, independent of operations, reporting directly to me. Your job would be to look at this company the way you've always looked at it, from the edges, from the places nobody else thinks to look." Noah was quiet for a moment. He folded his hands in his lap and studied them the way he studied everything, carefully, without rushing. "I don't have a degree," he said. "I know. I don't have any certifications. I don't know accounting terminology. I can read a spreadsheet because my dad taught me when I was a kid, but I couldn't tell you the difference between GAAP and whatever else there is. IFRS. Sure, that. Noah, I have an entire building full of people who know the difference between GAAP and IFRS. I have CPAs and MBAs and people with credentials that take up half a page on their resumes, and not one of them caught what you caught. Not one. Because they were all trained to look at the same things in the same way, and when something fell outside that pattern, they couldn't see it. You could. That's not something I can hire at a recruiting firm. You're offering me a job because I noticed a wrong number on a piece of paper. I'm offering you a job because you had the guts to walk up to a CEO you'd never spoken to and tell her she was wrong. Do you know how rare that is? In a company this size, people spend their entire careers avoiding that exact moment. They see problems and they keep walking. They hear things that don't sound right and they tell themselves it's not their business. You didn't do that, and I need people who don't do that. Noah rubbed the scar on his knuckle. He was thinking about Lily. He was always thinking about Lily, and what this would mean for her. More money, better hours, a job he could actually explain to her teacher without feeling like he needed to add qualifiers, but also more risk, more exposure. A seat at a table where people like him had never been welcome, and where the consequences of failure were measured in millions of dollars instead of dirty floors. "What's the salary?" he asked. Scarlett told him. It was more than triple what he made as a janitor. Noah's face didn't change. He'd spent too many years controlling his expressions in front of people who had more than he did to let surprise show, but his hands tightened slightly in his lap. "And my hours?" "Standard business hours, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, no nights." No nights. That meant being home when Lily went to sleep, reading to her at bedtime instead of kissing her forehead at midnight when he got home and finding her already curled up with the stuffed rabbit she refused to let go of, having dinner together, helping with homework, being present in a way that the night shift had never allowed. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course. Not because I don't want it, because I need to make sure it's the right thing. For my daughter." Scarlett nodded. She understood this. The calculus of parenthood, the way every decision passed through the filter of a child's well-being before anything else mattered. She didn't have children herself, but she had watched her father make that same calculation 1,000 times, weighing every business decision against the question of what it would mean for her. "Take the weekend," she said. "Let me know Monday." Noah stood. He extended his hand and Scarlett shook it. His grip was firm. The grip of a man who was used to physical work, who measured trust in handshakes and eye contact rather than contracts and letterheads. "One more thing," he said at the door. "What?" "The man who changed the number, Jason. What happens to him?" "He's been arrested. The FBI is handling it." Noah absorbed this with a slow nod. "Good. But that's not what I meant. I meant, is there going to be more? More people who did things they shouldn't have? More problems hiding in the numbers?" "Probably. That's why I need you." He looked at her for a long moment, and in that look there was something that passed between them. Not romantic, not sentimental, but something deeper and harder to name. A recognition. An acknowledgement that they were two people standing on opposite sides of an enormous divide. Wealth and poverty, power and invisibility, corner offices and maintenance closets, who had somehow ended up in the same room looking at the same problem and seeing it clearly for the first time. Monday, he said. Monday. He left the office and rode the elevator back down to the lobby. Carl, the security guard, was still at his desk. "How'd the meeting go?" Carl asked. Noah paused. He thought about the salary Scarlett had offered, the hours, the office he'd been shown on a brief tour of the oversight division's floor, the business cards that would have his name printed on them, Noah Bennett, internal oversight analyst, in the same font used for every other employee at Hayes Global Industries. "It went okay," he said. "Just okay?" "I'll tell you Monday." He walked out through the glass doors, the front doors, not the service entrance, and into the morning sunlight, heading home to his daughter. The weekend passed slowly, the way weekends do when your mind is full of a decision that keeps rearranging itself every time you think you've settled it. Noah took Lily to the park on Saturday morning. They fed the ducks at the pond, or tried to, because Lily kept eating the bread herself and then giggling when Noah gave her a look of exaggerated disappointment. "Daddy, the ducks aren't even hungry," she said, her mouth full of sourdough. "The ducks are starving, Lil. You're stealing food from ducks. How do you feel about that?" "Good." He laughed. She laughed. And for a moment, the decision waiting for him on Monday felt very far away. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Noah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Mrs. Delgado was knitting in the living room. She had a key to his apartment and came over most evenings, a routine that had started as childcare and evolved into something closer to family. "You're going to wear a hole in that table," she said, without looking up from her needles. "I'm thinking." "You've been thinking since Friday. Either you take the job or you don't. What's stopping you?" Noah wrapped his hands around the cold coffee mug. "I don't belong there, Elena. I belong on the night shift with a mop and a floor buffer. That's what I know. That's what I'm good at." Mrs. Delgado set down her knitting and looked at him over the tops of her reading glasses. She was 68, small, sharp, with the kind of directness that came from raising 4 children on a nurse's salary and having zero patience for self-pity. "Noah Bennett, you found a $300 million mistake that nobody in a suit could find. You walked up to a woman who runs a billion-dollar company and told her she was wrong, and she listened to you, and now you're sitting in your kitchen telling me you don't belong." It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. The only reason you think it's complicated is because you've spent your whole life being told you're not enough. Your father died when you were 16. You raised yourself. You raised that beautiful girl in there all by yourself. You work harder than anyone I've ever known. And the one time the world tries to give you something, you want to hand it back because you're afraid you don't deserve it. Noah stared at her. His throat tightened. He pressed his thumb against the scar on his knuckle, hard. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail, and you try again. That's what people do, Noah. That's what your father would have told you." He didn't answer, but something shifted in him. Some internal resistance that had been holding firm for days loosened slightly, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling and start working it gently from the other side. Monday morning, he put on the blue Oxford shirt again. Lily told him he looked fancy again. Mrs. Delgado told him to stop fussing with his collar and get out the door. He drove to Hayes Global and parked in the regular lot. Not the maintenance lot behind the building, but the regular lot where the rest of the employees parked. He walked through the front doors and took the elevator to the 32nd floor. Scarlett was in her office. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "Well," she said, "I have conditions." She raised an eyebrow. That same 2-millimeter movement he'd seen in the lobby 5 days ago. "First, I'm not wearing a tie. I'll wear the shirt, I'll wear the slacks, but ties make me feel like I'm being strangled, and I can't think when I'm being strangled." "No tie. What else?" "Second, if I'm going to be on this oversight team, I want to be able to talk to anyone in the building, not just executives, mailroom, maintenance, cafeteria staff, security. Everyone. Because the people at the bottom see things the people at the top never will, and if this team is going to work, it has to listen to all of them. Scarlett leaned back in her chair. Something changed in her expression, a softening that she probably wasn't aware of, a brief, unguarded moment that revealed how much the last 5 days had cost her. Done. Anything else? Yeah. One more thing. I want to keep cleaning the 14th floor conference room. She stared at him. You want to keep cleaning? 3 nights a week, on my own time. Not because I have to. Because that room is where I found the problem in the first place. And I want to keep looking. I want to keep being the guy with the mop who sees things nobody else sees. Because the day I stop being that guy is the day I become just another suit who stopped paying attention. Scarlett was quiet for what felt like a long time. When she spoke, her voice had a quality he hadn't heard from her before. Something unguarded, almost vulnerable, as if the professional armor she wore every day had developed a crack that she was choosing not to repair. You know, Noah, I've been running this company for 4 years. I've sat across from billionaires, senators, Fortune 500 CEOs. I've negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and I have never, not once, met anyone who asked me to let them keep cleaning floors as a condition of employment. First time for everything. She almost smiled. Not quite, but close. Welcome to Hayes Global Industries, Mr. Bennett, officially this time. He shook her hand again, same firm grip, same eye contact, and then he walked out of her office and down the hallway toward the elevator, and as he passed Claire's desk, the assistant looked up and said, "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," and it struck him that this was the first time anyone in this building had ever called him that without checking his name badge first. He rode the elevator down to the 7th floor, where the new oversight division was being set up in a cluster of offices that had previously belonged to a department that no longer existed. The space was half-furnished, desks without chairs, monitors without keyboards, whiteboards still wrapped in plastic. A woman in her 40s was arranging files on a shelf near the window. She turned when Noah walked in. "You must be Noah. I'm Sandra Okafor. Scarlett hired me last week to run the logistics side of the oversight team. I'm supposed to make sure the lights work and the coffee machine doesn't explode." "Nice to meet you." "Likewise. Your desk is the one by the window. I figured you might appreciate the view, given that you've been working in rooms without windows for the last 3 years. Noah walked to the desk and looked out the window. The view was unremarkable. A parking lot, a strip of trees, the side of another building. But it was a window, and the sunlight coming through it was warm on his face, and he stood there for a moment, letting it settle on him, feeling the strange and unfamiliar weight of being visible. His phone buzzed. A text from the number he'd saved as Scarlett's. Staff-wide email going out in 10 minutes. Announcement about the oversight division. Your name will be in it. Wanted to warn you so you don't find out from a stranger. He typed back, appreciated. Lily's going to want to frame it. The response came 30 seconds later. She should. She deserves to. Noah put the phone in his pocket and sat down at his new desk. It was clean, empty, waiting for him to fill it with whatever came next. Somewhere in the building, the email went out. Somewhere in the building, 1,100 people, the ones who had come back, the ones who were still deciding, the ones who were watching from a distance to see whether Hayes Global Industries would survive, read a message from their CEO announcing the creation of an independent oversight division and introducing its newest member by name, not by title, not by credential, not by pedigree, by name. Noah Bennett sat at his desk by the window and looked at the parking lot and the strip of trees and the side of the building across the way. And he thought about his father in the hardware store, and the wrench that slipped, and the scar on his knuckle, and the waiting room where a big man with rough hands had held his son's fist like it was made of glass. Scars mean you were doing something. He opened the first file on his desk, a preliminary review of the company's vendor payment system flagged for irregularities, and started reading. The vendor payment irregularities turned out to be real. Noah spent his first 2 weeks at the desk by the window pulling apart 3 years of payment records, line by line, vendor by vendor, using the same methodical patience he'd once applied to cleaning floors. He didn't have software training yet. Sandra Okafor had enrolled him in a database course that started the following month. So he did it the old way, with printouts and a calculator and a yellow legal pad where he tracked discrepancies in the same neat handwriting he'd used to annotate the cash flow report that started everything. By the end of his second week, he had identified 11 payments totaling just under $2 million that had been routed to a vendor called Greystone Consulting, a company that, as far as Noah could determine, had no website, no listed employees, no physical address, and no apparent reason to exist. He brought the findings to Scarlett on a Thursday afternoon. She was in her office with the door open, reviewing a stack of legal documents related to the ongoing court proceedings. The emergency motion to reverse the bankruptcy had been granted 9 days earlier. Judge Harmon had expedited the review after the FBI's preliminary findings confirmed the data manipulation, and the company was now in the exhausting, unglamorous process of undying. Creditors had to be recontacted. Contracts had to be renegotiated. Employees who had already found other jobs had to be replaced. The legal machinery of resurrection was slower and more tedious than the legal machinery of destruction, which struck Scarlett as deeply unfair but entirely predictable. Greystone Consulting, she said, scanning Noah's notes. I've never heard of them. Nobody has. Because they don't appear to do anything. But someone in accounts payable has been approving payments to them every quarter for 3 years. The invoices are vague. Strategic consulting services, operational advisory support, the kind of language that could mean anything or nothing. Who approved the payments? The approval chain goes through the finance department, specifically through Jason Wexler's office. Scarlett set the notes down and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. Of course it went through Jason's office. Every thread they pulled led back to the same place, the same man, the same 22 years of embedded access and institutional trust that had made the entire scheme possible. Give this to Rachel, she said, and copy the FBI. This is going to add to the charges. Noah nodded and turned to leave. Noah. He stopped. How are you adjusting? Honestly. He considered the question. Most people, when asked that, gave the answer they thought you wanted to hear. Noah gave the answer that was true. It's weird. I still feel like I'm trespassing, like someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, there's been a mistake and I need to go back downstairs and get my mop. Does anyone treat you that way? Not to my face, but I can feel it sometimes. The way people pause when they see me in a meeting, the way they look at my shoes or my hands, like they're trying to figure out what category I belong in, and they can't find the right box. Scarlett understood this better than she could express. She had spent her entire career in rooms where people were trying to put her in a box. Too young, too female, too much her father's daughter, and not enough her own person. The boxes were different from Noah's, but the feeling of being reduced to a category she hadn't chosen was the same. Give it time, she said. And then, because she owed him more than platitudes. And if anyone makes you feel like you don't belong here, tell me, personally, because you belong here more than most of the people in this building, and I will make sure they understand that. He looked at her for a moment, and something passed between them. That same recognition, that same acknowledgement of the strange and improbable connection that had formed between a CEO and a janitor over a single wrong number on a single piece of paper. It wasn't friendship exactly. It wasn't mentorship. It was something harder to define, a mutual understanding that they had each seen something in the other that nobody else had bothered to look for. Thanks, Scarlett, he said. Thank you, Noah. He left her office and walked back to the 7th floor, past Sandra Okafor's desk. Sandra was on the phone arguing with a furniture supplier about the chairs that had been delivered in the wrong color, and sat down at his desk by the window. The parking lot was full today. Not as full as it had been before the bankruptcy, but fuller than last week and fuller than the week before that. People were coming back. Slowly, cautiously, the way animals return to a territory after a storm. That evening, Noah left the building at 5:15, a time that still felt impossibly early to him after 3 years of night shifts, and drove to Lily's school to pick her up. She was waiting on the front steps with her backpack and a piece of construction paper covered in glitter and glue. I made you something, she said as she climbed into the back seat. What is it? It's a picture of our family. Noah looked at the construction paper. There were 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of a house that was mostly green with a lopsided chimney. The tall figure had brown hair and enormous hands. The small figure had pigtails and was holding what appeared to be either a cat or a very large potato. "That's beautiful, Lil. Who's the, Is that a cat?" "That's Mr. Whiskers. He's our cat." "We don't have a cat." "I know, but I want one, so I drew one." "That's how it works, Daddy. You draw what you want, and then it comes true." Noah clipped the picture to his sun visor and drove home. And for the rest of the evening, he didn't think about Greystone Consulting or Jason Wexler or the boxes people tried to put him in. He thought about his daughter and her absolute, unshakable belief that the world would give you what you wanted if you were brave enough to put it on paper. He wondered when he had stopped believing that. He wondered if he was starting to believe it again. The weeks that followed were turbulent in the way that recovery is always turbulent. Not the sharp, dramatic turbulence of crisis, but the grinding, daily turbulence of rebuilding something that has been broken and trying to make it stronger than it was before. The FBI's investigation expanded. Jason Wexler, facing multiple federal charges, including securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy, had initially refused to cooperate. But after 3 weeks in custody, 3 weeks during which his attorney explained in increasingly blunt terms the difference between a plea deal and a jury trial, he began to talk. The picture that emerged was both more complex and more pathetic than anyone had expected. Jason had been approached by an outside investor named Martin Hale, the man behind Pinnacle Capital Partners and the owner of the John Smith Gmail account, at an industry conference 18 months earlier. Hale had identified Hayes Global as a potential distressed asset target and had spent months cultivating a relationship with Jason, exploiting his resentment over being passed over for the CFO position, flattering his expertise, and gradually drawing him into a scheme that promised financial reward and professional vindication in exchange for a single act of sabotage. The cruelest part of the story was how easily Jason had been manipulated. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was not driven by greed, at least not primarily. He was driven by the corrosive, accumulated pain of feeling invisible in a company he had given his life to. The same pain that Noah Bennett had felt cleaning offices in the dark. The same pain that countless employees at every level of the organization had carried silently for years. The difference was that Noah had channeled his invisibility into vigilance. Jason had channeled his into destruction. Scarlett thought about this difference often in the months that followed. She thought about it when she sat in meetings with the new oversight team, listening to employees from every department share concerns and observations that had been bottled up for years. She thought about it when she redesigned the company's reporting structure, eliminating 3 layers of management that had served no purpose except to filter information and muffle voices. She thought about it late at night in her apartment, alone with a glass of wine, and the persistent, uncomfortable knowledge that the culture Jason had exploited was one she had built. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but deliberately, in the way that all cultures are built, through thousands of small decisions about who gets heard and who gets ignored, who gets promoted and who gets overlooked, who gets invited to the table and who gets told to clean it. She had built a company where silence was rewarded and where speaking up was a career risk. She had built a company where the hierarchy was so steep and so rigid that a 6-year veteran of the finance department felt he had no recourse except to burn it all down. She had built a company where the only person brave enough to challenge the numbers was someone who had nothing to lose because the company had never given him anything. That was her failure. Not the accounting error, not the bankruptcy, not Jason Wexler. Those were consequences. The failure was the culture that made all of them possible. And fixing it, actually fixing it, not just reorganizing the org chart and calling it transformation, was the hardest thing Scarlett Hayes had ever done. It started with the town halls. Once a month, Scarlett stood in the lobby of Hayes Global and spoke to every employee who showed up, not from a podium, not from a stage, but standing on the same polished floor where Noah had crossed toward her carrying a single piece of paper. She talked about what had happened. She talked about what was changing. She answered questions, all of them, even the hostile ones, even the ones that made her face burn and her jaw clench and her thumbnail dig into the side of her index finger. At the second town hall, a woman from the mailroom named Denise Garland raised her hand and said, "Ms. Hayes, I've worked here for 8 years, and this is the first time anyone above a floor supervisor has ever spoken to me directly. Why did it take a bankruptcy for you to notice that the rest of us exist?" The room went silent. Scarlett could feel the eyes of 600 employees on her, watching, judging, waiting to see whether the CEO's commitment to openness was real or performative. "Because I was arrogant," Scarlett said, "because I believed that leadership meant having all the answers, and I surrounded myself with people who told me what I wanted to hear instead of what I needed to hear. And because I never once considered that the most important voice in this company might belong to someone I'd never met." She paused. "I'm not going to pretend that one town hall or one new policy is going to fix that. It won't. Trust isn't built in meetings. It's built in the hallways, in the break rooms, in the conversations that happen when nobody's performing for an audience. And I know that earning your trust is going to take longer than losing it, but I'm not going anywhere, and neither is this commitment." Denise Garland looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, and sat down. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. It was acknowledgement, the simple recognition that someone was finally trying. And trying, Scarlett was learning, was where everything real began. The legal proceedings took 7 months to resolve. Jason Wexler pleaded guilty to 3 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. He was sentenced to 4 years in a federal facility in Virginia. Martin Hale, the architect of the Pinnacle scheme, received 6 years. Pinnacle Capital Partners was dissolved, its assets seized, its investors left to sort through the wreckage of a con that had been dressed up as a business strategy. The bankruptcy reversal was finalized in court on a Tuesday morning in March. Scarlett attended the hearing with Victor and the legal team. When Judge Harmon signed the order confirming Hayes Global Industries as a solvent, operational company, Scarlett felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, not triumph, not vindication. Grief. Grief for the months that had been lost, for the employees who had left and never come back, for the trust that had been shattered, between the company and its investors, between the company and its employees, between Scarlett and her own judgment. For Jason Wexler, a man who had spent 22 years building something and then burned it down because he couldn't bear being invisible any longer. She sat in the courtroom after the hearing ended, after Victor and the lawyers had filed out, after the judge had moved on to the next case, and she pressed her thumbnail into her index finger and let the grief move through her like weather, something that arrived, stayed, and eventually passed, leaving the air different than it had been before. Then she stood up, smoothed her blazer, and walked out of the courthouse into a day that was unremarkable in every way except that it was the first day of whatever came next. The company recovered. Not quickly, not easily, not without setbacks and stumbles and moments when Scarlett was certain the whole thing was going to collapse again under the weight of its own damaged reputation. But it recovered. Creditors who had filed claims withdrew them as the corrected financials were independently verified. Investors who had pulled out began cautiously re-engaging, drawn back not by Scarlett's promises, but by the company's numbers. The real ones. The ones that showed a fundamentally sound business that had been sabotaged from within and was now being rebuilt with a transparency that was unusual in corporate America. Employees returned. New ones were hired. The oversight division that Scarlett had created grew from 3 people to 12, and then to 20, spanning departments and disciplines, reporting directly to the CEO's office, answering to no one except the truth of what they found. And at the center of it, not at the top, not at the head of the table, not in a corner office with a view, was Noah Bennett. He never became a financial expert. He never got an MBA. He never learned to wear a tie or speak in the polished, jargon-heavy language that executives use to signal their competence to each other. He showed up every day in his blue Oxford shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, carrying a yellow legal pad and a calculator, and the same quiet, unhurried attention that had led him to notice a wrong number on a piece of paper that nobody else had bothered to read. He found things. That was his gift. Not brilliance, not charisma, not any of the qualities that corporate culture typically celebrated and rewarded. Just the simple, radical discipline of paying attention to what was actually there instead of what was supposed to be there. He found the Greystone consulting payments. He found a vendor billing discrepancy in the facilities department that had been leaking $40,000 a year for 5 years. He found a data entry pattern in the HR system that suggested someone was inflating overtime hours. Not maliciously, it turned out, but because the system's interface was so poorly designed that half the supervisors were entering hours in the wrong field without realizing it. Each finding was small, Each one was the kind of thing that a normal company would have caught through routine oversight, if the company had bothered to look. The fact that Hayes Global hadn't bothered was the point. The fact that they were bothering now was the change. 6 months after Noah joined the Oversight Division, Scarlett asked him to present his team's findings at the quarterly board meeting. He resisted. Hard. "I'm not a presenter," he said, standing in her office with his arms crossed in a posture that unconsciously mirrored her own. "I find things. Other people present them. You found them. You should present them." "Scarlett, I'm going to stand up in front of Gerald Pace and Linda Chen and the rest of those people, and they're going to look at me and see a janitor in a borrowed shirt. They're going to look at you and see the man who saved their company, and the shirt isn't borrowed. I've seen your closet. You bought 3 more. Noah almost smiled. "Sandra told you that." "Sandra tells me everything. It's one of her best qualities." He went back and forth for 2 days. He practiced in his apartment while Lily sat on the kitchen counter, eating an apple and providing commentary. "Daddy, you're talking too fast. Daddy, you keep looking at the ceiling. Daddy, say it like you mean it." "I do mean it." "Then say it like that." He presented at the board meeting on a Friday afternoon. His voice shook for the first 30 seconds. His hands gripped the sides of the podium so hard his knuckles went white. He said, 11 times. He counted later, replaying the moment in his head with the merciless precision of a man who had spent his life cataloging his own inadequacies. But the data was solid. The findings were clear. And when he finished, Gerald Pace, 71 years old, longest-serving board member, the man who had known Scarlett since she was 12 and who did not hand out compliments the way most people handed out business cards, leaned forward in his chair and said, "Mr. Bennett, that was the most useful board presentation I've heard in 15 years, and I've heard a lot of them." Noah's ears turned red. He nodded once and sat down. After the meeting, Scarlett found him in the stairwell on the 33rd floor. He was sitting on the steps with his tie. He had worn one for the presentation, against his own policy, loosened and hanging crookedly around his neck. "You survived," she said, sitting down on the step below his. "Barely." "Gerald doesn't say things he doesn't mean. You know that." "I know. That's what makes it terrifying." They sat in the stairwell for a few minutes without talking. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have been through something together and don't need words to acknowledge it. "Can I tell you something?" Scarlett said. "Sure." "When you walked up to me in the lobby that morning, when you said you missed something, I almost told you to leave. I almost dismissed you the way I dismissed 100 other people who tried to tell me things I didn't want to hear. And if I'd been 2% more arrogant, or 2% more exhausted, or 2% more certain that I already knew everything I needed to know, this company would be dead. 1,100 people would be out of work, and I would be sitting in some apartment somewhere telling myself that I did everything I could." She paused. "But I didn't dismiss you, and I've been thinking about why. And I think it's because in that moment, something in me recognized something in you, not your competence. I had no way of knowing whether you were competent, not your credentials. You obviously didn't have any. I recognized your courage, the courage to walk up to someone who had every reason to ignore you and say the thing that needed to be said anyway. That's the rarest quality in the world, Noah. Not intelligence, not expertise. Courage." Noah rubbed the scar on his knuckle. He was quiet for a long time. "My dad used to say that scars mean you were doing something, that the people without scars are the ones who never tried." Smart man. He was a hardware store owner who died at 48 because he worked too hard and didn't take care of himself. He wasn't smart about everything, but he was smart about that. Scarlett nodded. She thought about her own father, Richard Hayes, who had built a company from a single office and a second-hand desk, who had poured everything he had into a business and a daughter, and had been rewarded with a stroke that left him staring out a window in a facility in Connecticut, unable to speak, unable to know that his company had almost died and had been saved by a janitor and the daughter he had raised to be stubborn enough to listen. She visited him the following weekend. She sat in the chair beside his bed and told him everything. The bankruptcy, the error, Noah, Jason, the rebuilding. She didn't know how much he understood. His eyes tracked her face the way they always did, with an intensity that suggested comprehension even when the doctors said otherwise. "I almost lost it, Dad," she said. "Everything you built. I almost lost it because I was so busy being in charge that I forgot to pay attention." His hand moved on the blanket. A small, trembling motion, the closest thing to a gesture he could manage. She reached over and took his hand and held it the way you hold something you're afraid of breaking. "But I didn't lose it, and I'm not going to. Because I finally learned the thing you tried to teach me when I was 12 years old, and I wouldn't listen." She paused. His eyes were on hers. "You told me that the most important people in any company are the ones you never see, the ones who come in early and leave late and do the work that keeps everything running while everyone else takes the credit. You told me that, and I nodded. And then I spent the next 18 years building a company that did the exact opposite." His hand squeezed hers. Barely. Just enough. "I'm fixing it, Dad. It's messy, and it's slow, and I don't know if I'm doing it right, but I'm fixing it." She stayed for 2 hours. When she left, she drove back to the city with the windows down, letting the cold air hit her face, and she didn't cry because Scarlett Hayes did not cry while driving. It was a rule she'd made for herself years ago, one of many small, arbitrary disciplines she used to hold herself together. But her eyes burned the entire way home. On a Monday morning in October, almost a year after the bankruptcy filing that had started everything, Scarlett stood in the lobby of Hayes Global Industries at 6:45 a.m. The fluorescent lights hummed. The glass doors still had fingerprints on them. The floor was freshly waxed. She could smell the polish. And the lobby was empty except for her and the security guard at the front desk, who was new and whose name she had made a point of learning on his first day. "Morning, Jerome." "Morning, Ms. Hayes." She stood in the center of the lobby and looked at the floor. The same polished floor that Noah Bennett had crossed a year ago, carrying a piece of paper, breathing hard, looking her in the eye and saying 3 words that changed everything. "You missed something." She heard the service door open behind her. Footsteps. The familiar squeak of a cart with a bad left wheel. Noah came around the corner pushing his maintenance cart. It was 10 to 7 on a Monday morning, which meant he had already been at his desk on the 7th floor since 8 the previous Thursday, reviewing reports and tracking discrepancies and doing the work that his title, Internal Oversight Analyst, described in language that was far less interesting than the work itself. And now, at 10 to 7 on Monday, he was here in his gray uniform shirt, pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies, because 3 nights a week he still cleaned the 14th floor conference room. He stopped when he saw Scarlett. "You're up early," he said. "I'm always up early." "You're not usually standing in the lobby staring at the floor." "I was thinking." "About what?" Scarlett looked at him. This quiet, stubborn, imperfect man in his maintenance uniform, with the scar on his knuckle, and the daughter who drew cats she didn't have, and the neighbor who knitted in his living room, and the absolute, unshakable conviction that paying attention was the most important thing a person could do. "About how close I came to missing everything," she said, "and about how a man with a mop saw what a woman with an MBA couldn't. It wasn't the mop. It was the angle. You were looking from the top down. I was looking from the bottom up. Same company, same numbers, different view. And which view was right?" Noah considered this. He was always considering things, turning them over, looking at them from multiple sides, refusing to answer until he'd found the version of the truth that was honest rather than just convenient. "Neither one was right by itself," he said. "That's the whole point. You need both. The people at the top see the big picture. The people at the bottom see the details. And when they stop talking to each other, the whole thing falls apart." Scarlett nodded. It was the simplest possible articulation of the lesson she had spent the last year learning. A lesson that had cost her company hundreds of millions of dollars, her reputation, her certainty, and nearly everything her father had built. And it had been delivered by a man standing in a lobby at 10 to 7 in the morning, holding a mop, in a uniform that smelled faintly of floor polish. "I'm going to remember that," she said. "You'd better. I'm not saying it again." He pushed the cart past her toward the elevator, the bad left wheel squeaking against the polished floor. At the elevator doors, he stopped and looked back. "Scarlett." "Yeah." Lily drew a picture of the building last week. She put a sign on the front that says, "Daddy's Work." The old version had the sign on the service door in the back. Now it's on the front. He didn't explain why that mattered. He didn't need to. The shift from the back door to the front, from invisible to visible, from uncounted to named, from a man who cleaned offices in the dark to a man whose daughter proudly pointed at the front of a building and said that's where her father worked. That shift was the whole story. The elevator doors opened. Noah pushed his cart inside. "Have a good day, Scarlett." "You too, Noah." The doors closed, and Scarlett stood alone in the lobby, listening to the fluorescent lights hum and the distant whir of the building's mechanical systems cycling through their quiet, invisible, essential work. She pressed her thumbnail against the side of her index finger. The crescent mark was there, permanent now, a small white scar that would never fully fade. She looked at it. Scars mean you were doing something. She thought about everything that had happened, the bankruptcy, the error, the confrontation with Jason, the town halls, the rebuilding, the slow, painful, necessary process of learning to listen to the people she had spent years ignoring. She thought about Gerald Pace telling her that leadership failures don't fix themselves with new org charts, and about Rachel Torres admitting she had wanted to throw Noah out of the conference room, and about Victor Jeng standing in a hallway saying he was right about that, with a grief in his voice that belonged to a man confronting his own complicity. She thought about her father, staring out a window in Connecticut, holding her hand with the ghost of the grip that had once built an empire. And she thought about Noah Bennett, a 32-year-old single father with a scar on his knuckle and a daughter who drew pictures of the world as she wanted it to be, who had walked across a lobby one morning and changed everything because he believed that paying attention was worth something, even when the world told him it wasn't. The company was going to be fine. The numbers were strong. The employees were engaged. The oversight systems were working. The culture was changing, not perfectly, not completely, not in the neat and tidy way that corporate case studies like to describe, but changing, slowly, unevenly, the way real change always happens. But the thing Scarlett would carry with her, the thing that would stay with her long after the legal proceedings faded and the financial reports stabilized and the headlines moved on to the next corporate drama, was not the recovery. It was not the systems she had built, or the policies she had implemented, or the speeches she had given. It was the memory of 3 words spoken by a man everyone else ignored. You missed something. That was the whole lesson, not just for Hayes Global Industries, for every company, every institution, every organization that believed its systems were infallible, and its leaders were omniscient, and its hierarchy was a substitute for actual human connection. You missed something. You always miss something. The question is whether you've created a world where someone can tell you, or whether you've built a fortress of credentials and titles and corner offices that ensures you'll never hear it until it's too late. Scarlett Hayes, at 31 years old, stood in the lobby of the company she had nearly destroyed and then rebuilt, and she made one promise to herself. Not a grand promise. Not the kind you announce at a press conference or engrave on a plaque. The kind you make quietly, in an empty room, early in the morning, when nobody is watching, and the only witness is the hum of fluorescent lights and the fading squeak of a maintenance cart with a bad left wheel. No voice inside her company would ever again be considered too small to matter. Not because it was good business, not because it made for a compelling corporate value statement, but because a man with a mop had saved everything, and the least she could do, the very least, was make sure that the next time someone like him had something to say, the door would already be open. She took a breath. She straightened her blazer. She walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking on the polished floor that Noah Bennett had waxed 3 nights a week for 3 years, invisible and essential, like a heartbeat you never notice until it stops. The elevator doors opened. Scarlett stepped inside. There was a lot of work to do. There always was. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't carrying it alone. And somewhere on the 14th floor, a man in a gray uniform shirt was wiping down a conference room table, checking the papers left behind, reading the numbers nobody else bothered to read, paying attention, the way he always had.